Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 20th of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information by going online to weather.gov/Alaska or listening to your NOAA Weather Radio, Marine VHF, or calling the Weather Info line at 800-472-0391. Now, during the day, you can find information on Facebook in between the Alaska weather shows and in between forecast updates on our website. You can do that at NWS Alaska on Facebook, following NWS Alaska on Twitter, or any of our other weather forecast office sites at NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, or NWS Anchorage. You'll find more weather information and people talking about weather around Alaska and about Alaska by using the hashtag AKwx. And when you do that, or if you just want to share a picture that lets us know you're talking about Alaska weather, even if we don't follow each other yet. Now, the YouTube website for NWS Alaska is up, and if you follow NWS Anchorage, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. I love to talk about that because it gives you a heads up earliest in the afternoon about what's happening all the way around the state. And if you listen today, then you've probably heard me talk about some of this already today. The rainfall forecast for southeast, something we're watching very carefully, as the next weather system moves into the Gulf tonight and tomorrow and then deepens. It looks like it's going to drop a good 10 millibars here in the next 24 hours or so and continue tracking eastward. And with that brings more rain for southeast. And this is probably going to start up around Friday night and then continue through most of the weekend. And it is going to be heavy rain again. In some cases, that could be more than 3 inches across northern parts of southeast. And you can see all the way up around Gustavus and northward. Yakutat looks to be picking up, at least for this period, about 3/4 of an inch to as much as 2 inches of rain, but the really big hot spots seem to be just north of Cross Sound, around Juneau and points southward, and around Sitka, unfortunately, another 2 to 3 inches of rain. Now, this stops around Sunday night into Monday, so it is not a complete and total cumulative effect of all the rainfall through the event. There's probably going to be more than that as it heads into Sunday night and Monday. So you'll see those maps in just a few minutes. The other side of this is the wind. We are concerned about some of the wind gusts coming up in the region to maybe as high as 30 to 45 miles per hour. So there are going to be some stronger winds. You put all that together, and things like mudslides are still going to be possible. So you have heavy rain, you may have some flooding, and you could have additional effects like mudslides because of the wind gusts here up to 30 to 45 miles per hour. So if you're not yet, make sure your NOAA weather radio is working, your Marine VHF is dialed in as you need it, and then pay attention to the weather forecast from weather.gov/Juneau starting tonight and into the next several days and through the weekend. If you need a warning, they're going to have that there for you, whether it's a flood watch, flood warning, flood advisory, or some other alert having to do with effects there in southeast. As far as the winds and the waves go, you can see that the waves are going to come up. This is again through the early morning hours of the 23rd of August, so this is Sunday. And the waves coming up as high as about 15 to 20 feet at their maximum. That's offshore, though. In the inside waters, you're still talking about considerably lower waves. We'll get into the details here with the marine forecast at the tail end of the show there, but just wanted to give you a heads up that it does look like it's going to rain again as we head into the weekend for southeast. Now, here is Typhoon Etsani. This is the second of 2 typhoons we've been talking about a lot this week. This is still heading to the west-northwest, and all eyes in eastern Asia are watching this one as well. You can see the plumes of moisture stretching out and away from the subtropics and heading north toward the Alaskan Gulf. Some of that is associated with that sunny there, but this will continue curving northward, it looks like, and so we will be watching this very carefully over the next week or so to see how much further north it goes, and does it have any connection with Alaska as we go into the week to come. The visible satellite picture shows no tropical connections really right now. You can see a large swath of dry air has developed across the Gulf of Alaska, giving many across southeast a little bit of a break. Even so, in the last 24 hours, Sitka has picked up about a ½ inch of rainfall. Across most of the central and western Alaska region, we've seen plenty of clouds. Not so for all of south central and the Copper River Basin, a little bit of a break there. Cloud cover extensive across southwest and the western coast all the way up across the Arctic and northward. And you can see low pressure north of St. Paul. On the eastern side of that is a southwesterly draw that's bringing in more rainfall to the islands and a good part of the western coast. Most of that so far has been offshore, but Nunivak Island will reach that wetter part of the storm sooner than later. And out across the western Bering, a nice swath of drier but cooler air there. Most of the chain has seen plenty of cloud cover today. You can see that a northerly push is going to drop southward. That frontal boundary, or the leading edge of that weather change, will continue northward into the Pacific. Here's a look at the weather map, and here's our low pressure system that we're watching for southeast. And with that in mind, southeast still has a good day and a half before some of that heavier rainfall moves your way. Dry air is in place right now for most, and periods of moderate to heavy rainfall are likely occurring already across the south side of that storm. High pressure has broken up a lot of the clouds across south central, and we have a weather front that's located from the Brooks Range southward into the Bering, connecting up with that low pressure system north of the Pribilovs right here. That's at about 1,010 millibars. And that quickly scoots eastward and moves into south central tonight, and that will start to bring in more clouds and a few showers across the western slopes of the Alaska Range. There could still be a few showers across southeast, but we'll be watching the storm out across the Gulf develop as we head through tonight. That's still around 1,010 millibars with high pressure across the central Aleutians and another wave of low pressure across the northern Bering Strait region into Kotzebue Sound, with light rainfall expected there for many across the northern and western coast. As we get into Friday, low pressure drops to 995 millibars. It will be a beautiful storm on the satellite, but it will bring plenty of moisture to the northern Gulf Coast. And as far as south central goes, it looks like precipitation will mainly be limited to coastal areas. We'll be watching most of southeast, though. Ahead of the morning and the afternoon look fairly dry. It will be Friday night before most of that rain sets in. Showers will form out ahead of that in British Columbia and the Yukon. There might even be a spark of a thunderstorm or two on the north and western sides of the Alaska Range. And we'll be watching light rainfall across the north and western coast. There's enough cool air just offshore that you might see some mixing, but we're not expecting any major rounds of snow or anything like that across the north slope just yet. High pressure across the central Aleutians will lock in fog and stratus for most of the Bering Sea. And once we get into Friday night and Saturday, we'll be watching that system develop very quickly and deepen a little bit more just south of Yakutat and west of Sitka at 994 millibars. This will keep periods of moderate to probably heavy rain across central and northern parts of southeast for a fairly long duration, longer than the last time it was raining just earlier this week. So plan on some heavy rain. Again, we were talking about 2 to maybe 3 inches in some of the higher locations. On top of that, it's going to be windy, and wind gusts could reach upwards of 30 to 45 miles per hour. So without any watchers or warnings out just yet for this storm, it's a good time to plan ahead. And if you are in a flood-prone or wind-prone area in southeast, especially in central and northern southeast, it's time to start thinking about how that's going to affect your weekend. Now, as far as local weather goes in Juneau, a flood watch has been issued for the Mendenhall River and Lake. Once again, a glacial dam release is expected. They think it's occurring right now, but they're not exactly sure how much water has been released out of the Suicide Basin. So, with that in mind, monitor the Mendenhall River areas there. It's below 9 feet now, but as that comes up, and it's expected to do so, if it comes up over 9 feet, some flooding could be impacted, some areas could be impacted by flooding, as that has the potential of reaching over 9 feet. So right now a flood watch is posted. If it goes to an advisory or a warning, that'll let you know that something has been noted and flooding could occur, and if it is severe, a flood warning will be issued for the area. So once again, a flood watch issued for the Juneau area in association with the glacial dam lake around the Suicide Basin region. Now out across the west, warmer and wetter air will work its way into the coastal regions for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta by Saturday, as that warmer air is lifting around the northern side of high pressure across the central Aleutians. And with that, just enough cool air drops down, and we might see some rain and snow mixing together very close to the northern Arctic coast, but most precipitation as we'll see it across the interior, including Fairbanks, across Eagle, Northway, and the Alcan border, and across most of the western and northern parts of the Alaska Range will be in the form of showers. Most of south central, including the Cook Inlet region and Kodiak, might get on the drier side of the storm system in the Gulf and see a little bit more sunshine there as we go into the first part of the weekend. But again, rain for southeast is expected. Now, on that note, let's take a look at some nicer temperatures. 50s and 60s again for southeast. Looks like most areas, including the capital city, made it into the lower 60s today. 57 for Hyder, 59 in Sitka, lower 60s for Ketchikan and Annette. 69 in Cordova today with 68 in Valdez, lower 60s for most of the Cook Inlet region. However, Kenai made it up to 66, 57 in Homer, and 62 in Kodiak. Heading up the Parks Road to Talkeetna, you saw temperatures in the mid-60s this afternoon. Healy was 58, Greeley 56, and 58 in Fairbanks with 59 in Eagle. We saw 57 in Fort Yukon, but once you started going up the hills there, you'll notice temperatures dropped off fairly quickly around Arctic Village to Anaktuvuk Pass, mid-40s there, 48 around Ambler. 30s and 40s for the North Slope. Coastal areas were a little bit cooler, of course, at Barrow and Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse only in the upper 30s, 37 in Kaktovik, lower 40s from Wainwright southward to Point Hope and Point Lay, with Kivalina showing 46 and 51 in Kotzebue. It was 52 in Shishmaref today, 50 in Nome, and Unalakleet saw temperatures in the lower 50s with Grayling at 54, Galena at 60, 58 in McGrath, 55 around Sparevon, 58 for Bethel. Nunivak Island was only 54, 50 in Savunga today, and lower 50s as you head out toward Cape Newenham. Lower 50s or lower 60s for Bristol Bay, including King Salmon at 65. Most of the peninsula saw temperatures in the mid 50s to lower 60s around Sandpoint, once again one of the warmer spots. The Pribilofs were holding around 50 degrees, 48 in Atka. Adak was 54 and 50 around Attu this afternoon. Now, overnight low temperatures will still be mild out across the west and southwest thanks to low pressure sitting across the central Bering. Bristol Bay, one of the warmer spots, around 50 degrees, a little cooler at Nome at 46, 32 in Barrow, 40 for Fort Yukon, lower 40s for the middle Tanana Valley, North Pole and Fairbanks included, mid 40s for south central, Cook Inlet and Anchorage, Matsu and the Susitna Valley. It looks like 52 around Kodiak and close to 50 degrees for a large part of southeast. High temperatures tomorrow, once again mild across southwest, upper 50s to lower 60s from Bristol Bay northward into Norton Sound. Unalakleet looking at 54, about the same there for Nome. Barrow, just one of the cooler spots at 40 degrees tomorrow, or just shy of it. Mid-60s around the middle Tanana Valley. In Fairbanks, south central could be toasty, especially in the Susitna Valley, closer to 70 in some cases. 61 in Kodiak, and in the upper 50s and lower 60s for southeast, with the chain and most of the peninsula at or below that 60-degree mark. In fact, the central Aleutians could be cooler in the lower 60s. On to flying weather. IFR conditions are expected across the Arctic coast. Watch for some convection north and west of the Alaska Range. A better chance of just lower ceilings the further west you go with IFR around interior parts of Kotzebue Sound, Noatak and Kobuk Valleys included. Also the coastal areas of Norton Sound and areas around Pribilofs and westward into the central and western chain, and also around that developing system out across the central Gulf. MVFR conditions mainly limited to the outer coast there, but some of that could sneak into the Dixon entrance. Your pass conditions include Anaktuvuk heading over toward MVFR. The same goes for Adigan Pass as we go into your Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look pretty good. Watch for some afternoon convection in Rainy Pass and Lake Clark and Merrill. Windy Pass included. Right now looks to be mainly VFR. The same goes for Isabel Pass. Visual expected through most of the day there. And from Antasta Pass to Nita Pass looks to be VFR. We expect Portage Pass to hold at VFR through most of your Friday, and Chilkoot and White Pass at least one more day of VFR conditions, but Friday night things will start to change fairly quickly. Here's a look at the freezing levels, and the surface freezing line is starting to shift eastward once again as warmer air rebuilds quickly. 2, 4, and 6,000 foot lines across most of the interior, with a little bit of warming heading up ahead of that storm system. 8, 10, and 12,000 foot freezing levels for most of southeast. You can see that colder air dragging downward as low pressure is moving out of the Bering and heading for the central Gulf. Levels across the eastern chain and as well as the Alaska Peninsula as low as 6,000 feet tomorrow. Icing potential ahead of that system looks to be fairly high up there right now, above 9,000 feet, but some of that could reach into the occasional moderate range. Same goes for areas north of the Brooks Range, north of Ambler, some of that above 3 to above 7,000 feet as you head southward Most of that light to isolated moderate, but watch for some lift and some potential for icing there across the north slope as we head into your Friday. The jet stream shows the doors are open now, at least a little bit. Cracked, let's say. The doors are cracked to the Arctic with low pressure. Pretty much looks like a slide, doesn't it? The slide allowing that cooler air to drop southward, and that gives that next weather system in the Gulf a little bit of extra oomph to get up and go and feed moisture right into southeastern Alaska. We're also watching the upper level motion there from the jet stream that's supporting the typhoons across eastern Asia. That's what you're seeing out there with low pressure, and this track would allow that to recurve in the next week or so. 9,000-foot winds show westerlies coming into most of the Seward Peninsula and the northwest coast around the Chukchi. Also westerlies crossing the Bering, feeding into low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska. Wind speeds right now close to coastal southeast, around 35 knots. Light northerly winds coming down through Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, and a gentle northwesterly flow coming over the YK Delta at around 20 knots. At 3,000 feet, a very similar pattern. Wind speeds are a little different and stronger across eastern parts of the Gulf. On the south side of the storm, up to 40 knots. North and easterly winds coming over Denali and most of the interior around 10 to 15 knots. And we have westerlies coming into the Chukchi seacoast about 15 to 20 knots with a southerly flow leaving the Beaufort seacoast at around 10 knots. As we look at turbulence, then, we'll watch for a developing area of turbulence out ahead of that weather system below 10,000 feet. Expect much stronger winds to start forming up as the day goes on, and especially into the evening hours. So occasional moderate would not be unlikely there ahead of that weather system. Below 3,000 feet across the Beaufort seacoast, still some faster moving winds just offshore. Watch for some chop around St. Matthew and points west, and then below 6,000 feet south and west of Shemmy if you're flying out there. Here's a look at that's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a look at the sea ice edge and a recap of your marine weather and surface weather here in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Yay, winter is back. Well, almost.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Hey Dean, guess what? Winter is just around the corner.
What do you mean just around the corner? We're in the middle of August. It's not even autumn yet.
Exactly. Because even in the sultry skies of August, if you wake up early enough this week, you can get a preview of the brightest stars of winter, and you can see the reappearance of the planets Mars and Venus.
Get up early. Under normal circumstances, I'd just as well wait until December to see the stars of winter. But I always like a good preview, so let's do it. Okay, we've got our skies set up for Monday, August 24th, about 45 minutes before sunrise facing east, where you'll see several bright stars covering a huge area from east to southeast.
Looking south of east, just above the southeast horizon, you'll see winter's super bright star, Sirius. Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky, and it's also the brightest star of Canis Major, Orion's big hunting dog.
Up and to the left of Sirius is Procyon, which marks the eye of Orion's little dog. And above and to Procyon's right, completing a triangle of bright stars, is Betelgeuse, the bright red shoulder of Orion.
Down and to the right of Betelgeuse are three unmistakable stars, evenly spaced in a row, which mark Orion's belt. His ankle star, Rigel, and his knee star, Saiph, are to the right, and his two shoulder stars, Betelgeuse and Bellatrix, are to the left.
Directly above Orion's shoulder stars lies Aldebaran, the reddish star which marks the eye of Taurus the bull. And to Taurus's left is Capella, the brightest star of winter's Auriga the charioteer. Directly below Auriga are Castor and Pollux, the two brightest stars of the Gemini twins.
So, even though the nights at the end of August may still be hot and sultry where you live, if you get out just before sunrise every August, you can see many of the brightest stars of winter climbing above the eastern horizon.
But this year, something has been added, because directly below Castor, Pollux, and Procyon, you'll see an additional pair of bright lights, two wandering stars which weren't there this time last year. You'll be looking over 230 million miles across the solar system at the red planet Mars.
And if you have a really clear view of the horizon, you may catch our sister planet Venus emerging from the glare of the sun. It may be tough to spot Venus in the early part of next week, but by Labor Day, Venus will scoot past Mars on its way toward the Gemini twins. And as always, may we remind you that whenever we look for Mars, we need to remember that Mars is only half the size of our Earth. So you'll be looking at a very small planet that's very far away. Now, if you watch both these planets through the end of August and into September, you'll notice that Venus gets a little bit higher above the horizon each day, while Mars will get farther below Venus each day.
And if you have a really flat, cloudless horizon on the morning of Friday, September 11th, you may see one of the skinniest moons you'll ever see, below and to the right of Mars. It'll be right next to the bright star Regulus of Leo the Lion. And even the giant planet Jupiter will join the fun, emerging from the solar glare very close to the horizon.
So, there you have it. All of winter's bright stars visible in the east at the end of August, just before sunrise. Procyon, Sirius, and Betelgeuse mark the winter triangle. Betelgeuse, Rigel, Saiph, and Bellatrix mark the giant hunter Orion, and above them lie Aldebaran and the V-shape of Taurus, plus Castor, Pollux, Venus, Mars, and eventually Jupiter and the Moon.
And if you can't get up before dawn to see this preview of winter, never fear, because we have saved a planet moon scoochie for you.
That's right, Dean. Near the end of this week, on Saturday, August 22nd, look southwest after sunset. Among the claws of Scorpius the Scorpion, the moon will pay a close visit to the ring planet Saturn.
It's all there for you to see if you remember to keep looking up.
Here's an update on the sea ice edge across the Beaufort seacoast, and we're specifically looking at areas west of Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, and then east of Point Barrow. This chunk of ice here is a really broad area, and there may be some open water in it, but there's a much better chance that seas are at least a little more open here in the areas we don't have colored in with this light blue region. This area, and we're zoomed out pretty far, is actually a distance of about 2.5 nautical miles from the coast, including areas around Kaktovik, to about 5 nautical miles as far out there for the main ice pack. But there's some thicker concentrations in here that are still holding just north of the mud flats and the coast from Dead Horse to Prudhoe Bay that will probably create a challenge for anybody trying to navigate from Barrow and around the point all the way toward Kaktovik or from the other direction. So some challenges exist right now because of the sea ice edge and lingering ice pack. The main pack of this, even with more open water to the north, is still holding fast there just north of Kaktovik and certainly around Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay. You can always go to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the very latest information there, as it does change on a daily basis sometimes. And we had a very good shot from the satellite picture that helped our analysts take an expert look at that today, a much clearer view than what we've had in recent days, so confidence is pretty high right there. So Friday in southeast, look for winds to pick up from the south and southeast as we go throughout the day. They'll still be fairly light across the inner waters, 5 to 15 knots all the way from south to north, up to 20 to 25 knots heading up toward Yakutat on the outer coast, with seas as high as 6 to 7 feet by the end of the day, and then picking up to small crafts with 35 knots there from 17 to 18 feet in some cases around Sitka, with a broad, strong southerly flow. Southeasterlies picking up on the inside waters, 25 knots with 5-foot seas, and northerlies respond out of the Lynn Canal up to 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. For south central, easterlies also picking up on Friday with winds to 25 to 30 knots in the northern Gulf. Inside Prince William Sound, still holding around 10 knots from the east. A north and easterly wind coming down Cook Inlet, 3-foot seas there. A light flow west of the Barrens to Shelikof Strait, and northerlies pick up east of the Barrens, 25 to 30 knots, 5 to 6-foot seas on Friday. Those will switch around to the north and west as we get into Saturday, 15 to as strong as 35 knots coming over the Barrens with small crafts there. North and northwesterly winds blowing out of Prince William Sound at 10 to 25 knots. Seas in the north and western Gulf holding at 8 to 11 feet for now, it looks like, for Saturday, responding to that system strengthening in the eastern Gulf. For Friday, northwesterlies crossing the Alaska Peninsula, 25 knots all areas, 5 to 6-foot seas in the Bering, 7-foot seas in the Pacific. For Saturday, a little bit of a westerly shift in the Bering, 25 knots there, 7-foot seas in the north, and 7 to 9-foot seas in the Pacific, with 25 to 30 knots on Saturday as you look at the peninsula. Northwesterlies also feeding into the system in the Gulf, 15 to 25 knots there, 7-foot seas across the central and eastern chain for most areas in the Pacific coast, and 8 to 9-foot seas, especially in the east there, up to 20 knots. Look for a southeasterly flow across Kiska and Attu at 15 to 20 knots on Friday. That's up to 20 to 25 knots on Saturday, and winds diminish for the central and eastern chain as we get into Saturday, with waves dropping to 5 to as low as 6 feet there in the east, but coming up to 7 to 9 feet with a responding southerly flow across Adak and Atka, and that northwesterly wind still holding seas up there around 9 feet again north of Atka for Saturday. Westerlies, that broad westerly flow coming into the west coast, 15 to 20 knots. Northwesterlies in Kuskokwim Bay, and northwesterlies also occurring for St. Paul and St. George with an 8-foot sea on Friday. That becomes a little more westerly with time for the Pribilof Islands on Saturday, with seas down to 6 feet. 5 to 6 foot seas most areas closer to the western mainland coast and St. Lawrence Island. St. Matthew Island looking at 8-foot seas around the surrounding waters there, with a westerly flow at 25 knots for Saturday. For the Beaufort Seacoast, it's easterly winds, 15 to 20 knots there. Again, 4 to 5-foot seas in some cases east of Kaktovik, 3 to 4-foot seas for the Chukchi Seacoast, and we're still looking at enough ice to keep this as an ice forecast there for areas north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. North and easterly winds coming down Cape Lisburne to Point Hope, 15 knots. Southwesterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound become northwesterly on Saturday, down to 15 knots, and easterlies strengthen a little bit north of Kaktovik, up to 25 knots for Saturday. Now, recapping the weather, the main event is going to be a strengthening system in the Gulf heading into tonight and tomorrow. This is bringing in subtropical moisture into the eastern Gulf. That means an increasing threat for rain and some of that heavy across central and northern parts of southeast going into Friday night and into Saturday, Sunday, and probably into Monday. That could mean 2 to 3 inches of rainfall or more across central and northern parts of southeast, along with strong and gusty winds to 30 to 45 miles per hour as we head into Saturday and Sunday. On top of that, a flood watch posted for the Mendenhall Lake and River thanks to the glacial dam releasing. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.